bond counsel keeps us in line with all of the minutia of North Dakota Century Code that John Shockley had shared with you at the last meeting. There's a lot of reference to state century code in all of this business, and it's very tightly prescripted by state law. There is some local opportunity, and we'll point out a couple of those as we move through the presentation. And
allows the city to include all of its reasonable costs related to the project in that district. That doesn't mean from a policy perspective that the city can't decide, well, we want to reduce the amount of engineering fees, or we want to reduce the bond issuance costs. That's a policy decision, but legally cities can include all of those costs within there.
We're in a strong community. People pay their special assessments. We don't have delinquencies, so we felt comfortable to lower it from 1.5 to 1. How do we account for debt issuance costs, like closing costs on a house? How does that get paid? In the Century Code, in the Century Code, there's two options. You can either assign those closing costs directly to the assessment project and assess it directly, or you can recover those costs indirectly by using this markup. It does cost money to bond. It's not any different than any other type of closing costs on a piece of real estate. You pay closing costs. And talk a little bit about risk, and then that's also related to the markup. So at any point in time, if a taxpayer decides they're not going to pay their specials, and if they all did that all together and jumped it off the bus at the same time, the city still has to make our debt payments every year. And as right now, that's it's about $30 million a year from assessments that are collected. So we're obligated to pay that. And if we don't have the money in those funds to pay that debt, we're required by covenants to levy property taxes, general taxes, to cure those deficiencies. And so there is risk. And on that, a while back, somebody too asked, well, how many people pay off their specials in full and how many let them ride? A show of hands here, how many pay off their specials and how many let them ride? Predominantly, the answer was, I'm just going to let it ride. Because if I move out of my property, why should I pay off my specials? It all has to do with how you feel about managing money. I don't want to pay a dime of interest, so I'm going to pay the city and we're done.
One of the safety nets, though, is a 50% letter of credit on all developed or sold lots. If we would go back, if there was an economic downturn, the developer still is 50% liable for everything. So.
Right. But on the flip side of that note, the city is ultimately 50% liable on the other half.
You can have someone defer or be delinquent on their assessment payments. And so it takes a while. It takes up to 5 years to get your money out of foreclosure. So someone stops paying. Defaults are very, very rare. And so this gap becomes a cash shortfall.
Get sold tax forfeit or returned to the city. With what are called later call dates. And a call date means that's the date upon which the bond can be called and prepaid. And typically a financial advisor for a city will recommend a later call date because that reduces the overall interest rate, because the person buying the bond wants to have a guaranteed investment flow for a set period of time. If you got rid of all your call dates, your interest rate would be higher, so it's a financial decision that's made by the financial advisor and usually the city finance staff to obtain lower interest rates. Most bond issues have between a 5 and an 8 year call fee.
Just because I were to install the local improvements does not exempt that from having special assessments next year, the following year, or the year after, or to say there isn't already some specials already on that run with that land from regional storm, arterials, trunk lines, anything else. So
I think it's important at times to challenge state law. You look at some of the codification of law, right? To be looking at law and challenging it. But we've been snagged a couple of times on some things where we've exercised that authority, got called on it, and then had a negative impact on the city. The traffic fines is a classic example. A certain amount of flexibility and creativity, opportunity, so you can either just say, well, we can't because the law is this way, but you got to be a bit careful with that, because in the end they have the ability, or somebody that's aggrieved by what we're doing has the ability to bring it up and, sue us potentially if they think we're going in the wrong direction.